had a question for you. First, it's about a lot of the JavaScript patterns. I'm seeing the MVC style with Backbone JS, and I like it, and Ember, and a lot of the other libraries that come out recently. It's making, because we're writing so much JavaScript now, easily organized and well maintained, so other people can change the code and work along. So, and then what about the ECMAScript 6? I think it's called Harmony, which has classes and modules. What do you think? How is that going to play with out of the new patterns? And do you think the reason people come up with new ways to write JavaScript is because the standard is not adapting fast enough? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's a similar tension to that evolution as there is to the web browser, although I think ECMA is managing it better than W3C is. So the difficulty is always that we don't want to break the web, even though you could argue, and I do argue, that the web is already deeply broken. So there are things that we know that are problematic in JavaScript, and we partially deprecated them by putting in a strict mode in ES5. And we got a lot of complaints about that. There are people who write profoundly stupid code who are annoyed that we put in the strict mode, which interferes with their ability to exercise their right to be stupid. And that's the hardest thing. So in my view, the best way to improve ECMAScript would be to take the bad parts out. But we are terribly constrained on our ability to do that. So instead, we're going to add more crap. So for ES6, we're considering a huge basket of crap to throw into the language. And if you look at each of those features individually, they're great. But we haven't looked adequately at the interaction of all those features. And I expect there's going to be, some of those are going to turn into bad parts. And at this point, I can't predict what they are. There are a few pieces that I'm confident will be good parts, and I'm very much looking forward to the next standard for those. And I'm hoping that the standard won't be late. In particular, I'm looking forward to proper tail calls, which is something we got with Scheme, which we should have properly in JavaScript, but we don't yet. And the new splat operator, which will replace the arguments pseudo array, which was maybe the secondest stupidest thing that Brendan and Mike will ever come up with. But we'll see. At this point, I'm not willing to predict what is definitely going to be in the next edition or not. We need to finalize stuff pretty soon because we need to present it to the ECMA General Assembly a year from now, which, given the number of things we have to do between now and then, including writing the standard and testing it and sending it through the Central Committee of ECMA, I think we're probably going to be late, given the amount of work we have left to do. And that's too bad, because I want the good parts of ES6, but they're going to have to be delayed because of the bad parts in ES6.
And got one more question, quick question for Steve. It's about, I've noticed like when you're browsing a lot of tabs, and when you switch from your active tab to a different one, it starts the spinner goes off. What are websites doing is that a good pattern to use for performance reasons? What are they doing?
It depends on what's going on. One thing that I have noticed that I'm actually kind of pleased about is the page visibility. People using the page visibility API, which came out of the recently formed W3C Web Performance Working Group. So the idea is a lot of people do this. They open URLs in a background tab. I do it all the time. I do, command click. And I'll open a bunch of URLs, and whichever one comes back first is the one I go to. And so on those pages that you're opening in a background tab, they might do something like play a video, play audio, start a photograph carousel spinning. They might send beacons about, hey, the user just looked at our page, when actually the user never looked at the page. And so with this page visibility API, you can now detect when someone brings your page from a background tab to the topmost tab. And so sometimes I'm noticing when that happens, people will take action. They'll load a carousel or load an ad or do something, maybe send a beacon. And if they're doing something, it depends on the browser, but typically the spinner only goes off if they're doing HTTP requests. And so it's possible that triggering that visibility state is triggering some other HTTP request, which I think is a good thing.
How do any of your performance recommendations change when you enter the mobile space? For instance, the average round-trip time on a 3G network in the US is something around 240 milliseconds per request.
Yeah.
So something like the self-updating script seems to take several requests to complete. Are you looking at the mobile space?
Yeah. I'll touch on your last point, and then I'll go back to the initial question. So on the last point, even though it's generating more requests, they're in the background and they're not blocking anything in the page. And so, and the benefit of that is this bootstrap script that might have had a 15-minute expiration time can now have a 1-year expiration time. And so 16 minutes from now, when I load that page again, I would have had to do if modified since request, and even though the response could be a very tiny 304 response, that latency, which is even bigger on mobile than it is on desktop, is even more of a problem. So the number one rule in the very first book was reduce the number of HTTP requests, and that's still the number one rule, and it's especially true for mobile. And the number of requests also includes conditional GET requests, which are, percentage-wise suffer the most from latency because they're typically a very small, pithy, quick response, and instead you're on this high latency network. And so this thing that should be quick is actually taking a long time. In general, the best practices from my books apply just the same to mobile. The priorities of them would be a little different. For example, one of my rules is to reduce redirects. On the desktop, a redirect worldwide average is probably 250 milliseconds. On mobile, it's typically over a second. And it's exacerbated because depending on how you've implemented your mobile site, what a lot of people do is if the user has gone to www.mysite.com, it will redirect them to m.mysite.com. And that redirect is happening, what we want to have happen is we want the HTML document, which is the commands for the browser to get going, rendering this page. We want to get that HTML document into the browser's hands as quick as possible. And now what we've done is we've put this 1 second redirect delay in front of everything, in front of the HTML document. So, that one, like reducing redirects, I think in the first book, I put them in priority order, and I think it was like number 9 or something like that. I'd probably make it like number 3 or 4 for mobile. So really none of the rules don't apply. There was one, it might have been domain sharding. Oh yeah, it was domain sharding because mobile browsers often will open fewer number of TCP connections than they do on the desktop. Like, the Android browser only opened 2, whereas the Chrome browser on the desktop opened 6 for a given host name. And so that would actually argue more for domain sharding because they're only opening 2 connections per host name. But they also set the maximum number of connections very low, like at 4 or 8 or 10. So doing domain sharding really doesn't help you that much because you're going to overwhelm the TCP pool, exhaust the TCP connection pool fairly quickly. And you'll have the cost of doing these DNS lookups that really aren't buying you much benefit. That's the only one that I think I would kind of pull back on for mobile. But otherwise, they all apply just some different priorities.
What about inlining versus externalizing? Like, I know a lot of times we externalize on desktop, whereas actually inlining that content on mobile can be faster.
Yeah, you're right. That is, I'm remembering now because I have a presentation that talks about that, and there's 1 or 2 that I cross out, I think that's one of them. Is definitely one of the rules in the first book was make scripts and style sheets external, and depending on the user patterns for your website on mobile, it can make a lot more sense to inline those. Although I will say that in the book I talked about dynamic inlining, which I still don't see a lot of people doing, but would work really well for mobile, which is inline them if you don't see a cookie, but then once the page is loaded, dynamically download the actual external scripts and style sheets, get them into cache and set a cookie, And the next time the user goes to the page, the server, if it sees the cookie, can say, oh, I don't need to inline, I'll just reference the external resources, and hopefully they'll be in the cache. I did an experiment, and it was just, getting volunteers to do something, and they didn't really know the purpose. And it was only a couple hundred people, but I found a very high correlation between clearing the cache and clearing cookies. And so likely the cookie is a pretty good proxy for the state of the cache.
There seems to be an almost mind-boggling number of toolkits available in JavaScript advocating MV star, MVP over MVC in conjunction with SPA single-page architecture and the whole Backbone family and Ember, and the latest I heard is knockbase, which is knockout and Backbone. I'm getting confused. So which of those have you looked at, and which ones do you think are getting it right in terms of performance and also the patterns that they advocate, which seems to be that they're saying it's better to go away from MVC. So I'm really confused. If you can help me, I'd appreciate it.
I have not done any performance analysis comparing those, and I would bet that it has less to do with the style and more to do with the things that I look at, like how the scripts are loaded and things like that.
There's require.js, AMD, lab.js. That's another point of confusion.
Yeah, I was going to say, as far as the style stuff goes, the man is right here, so he would be better to talk about that. And I would bet that he, might even have some performance insights with those different ways of programming JavaScript. And then I think your second question, follow-up question was, well, what about all these different script loaders that are out there, like lab.js and require and yep-nope and stuff. And I wrote one called Control.js, and I think it's the best one out there now. Unfortunately, I stopped. I launched it, and I haven't gone back to look at it. It's not like an ongoing thing. I was sorely disappointed in the script loaders that were out there, and I wanted to show people that we could raise the bar, that it wasn't impossible. And so on the front page of Control.js, and you can go to controljs.org.com. I've got both of them. I've got like 5 or 7 bullets, which are the main features. And one of the most important features is Control.js itself can be loaded asynchronously. And none of the other ones have that capability. Some of them are pretty small, and they say, well, you could just embed us in your page. And it's like, well, I realize it's only 3K, but do I really want to add 3K to every HTML document that people are downloading? And the other nice thing about Control.js is it's just based on markup. You don't have to code to get, you don't use JavaScript, you just use HTML markup. And a fair number of people have adopted it. Some big companies, New Relic has adopted it. The Washington Post is using it. So even though I don't support it, and it's not, I don't even think it's, up on Google Code or anything. Anyway, people are using it. So, but I think they're all good. I'll say one thing about that lab.js Kyle Gitify guy is he's done just the opposite. He's put a heck of a lot of support and maintenance and testing into his into lab.js. And so I think look at the features and see what kind of works best for what you want to do.